Patriarchy has this sinister way of making women sabotage their own creative vision, and I want to get it.
Vanessa is absolutely brilliant. I insist you go watch that video and follow, but I want to add something to this conversation. I want to talk to you about suffering, the idealized savior, and the rescue fantasy, particularly as it applies to women and marginalized people. So for anybody who ever grew up feeling powerless over their external situations or the world that was going around them was just general chaos, you're probably already familiar with the concept of the idealized savior or the rescue fantasy. These fantasy bonds often occur in early childhood. We imagine being plucked from our circumstances, whether it's by some wealthy family, some switched at birth fantasy, or some magical hero coming in and saving us from the circumstances that we're in. It's almost as if in some way we're aware of the loss that we're experiencing, the needs that aren't being met, and are seeking this sort of imaginary space where we can be free, where we can be safe, and where we can access redemption in some way. Now, as adults, this can look a lot of different ways, but I want to talk specifically about how it can show up for women and for marginalized people in general. I think one of the ways this shows up most frequently, right, is the idea of the over-functioning, overproducing person that somehow is able to be seen for the suffering that they're carrying inside and rescued from it by someone else, be it a partner, a job, a lottery ticket, etc. And I think, unfortunately, for a lot of women, this shows up and ultimately ends up placed on a romantic partner, particularly a man that is expected or hopefully will come and save them from the traumatic experiences they've had so that they're finally able to flourish and bloom into the true version of themselves. Now, there's something really marvelous about what Vanessa's saying about the abdication or the sacrifice of creative energy, particularly for women. And I think when we think of our sacrifices, right? Whether we have a rescue fantasy or not, we often engage with this sunk cost fallacy. We see the sacrifices that we make, even if we are dreaming and yearning that one day someone will see how much we've paid, how much we've given, how much we've lost or given away, even how much we've stolen and robbed from ourselves. That one day someone will see that. I think a lot of us have this idea that when we sacrifice, when we give, that we just lose, right? That creative energy, that potential is just gone. I really want to talk about the concept of limerence in this case because, like all energy, creative energy cannot be created or destroyed. And so I think for a lot of people, that energy ends up redirected into these fantasies. And I think this goes part and parcel with the way that a lot of particularly marginalized people and women internalize their own suffering and almost use their self-sabotage and self-sacrifice as a way to self-harm. And in doing so, have a sort of secret flame, if you will, a secret hope that someone will see, wow, you've given so much, you've sacrificed so much. I want to rescue you. You should never have to do that again. I see how much you've given, and it's now your turn to receive it all back. But of course, we live in reality, and the world isn't made of damsels and rescuers. The world isn't made of people who have self-sacrificed or been harmed, and big fantastical stories where we get scooped up in the end. And oftentimes what happens is we get really comfortable in these fantasies because they're a way for us to escape the realities, both of our external world that maybe we don't have very much control over, and of the consequences of our own behavior when we abdicate responsibility and when we sacrifice our creative potential. We're able to almost recede into these worlds, into these elaborately built and designed stories and fantasies that shatter when confronted with the reality of a real human being that isn't actually able to do that or be that for us. It's for this that a lot of my politics, not just around decentering men, but around accessing liberation in general, are about abolishing the concept of the dream girl or the dream person or the dream partner and abolishing the concept of the one. Because so much of this rescue, savior fantasy is wrapped up in the idea that there is going to be a one to pick us up from our obscure, unseen suffering and allow us, give us the permission, really give us the space, give us the liberatory energy and momentum we need to actualize ourselves. And the reality is that the only one that can offer us that is ourselves. Like, despite these early experiences of helplessness and powerless, be they interpersonal, familial, systemic, or structural, right? These stories that we tell about our power, about our worth, and about who is responsible for our outcomes, I think deeply depends on how much responsibility we are willing to and able to take at a given moment for our own lives and experiences. And that's not to say, as I always say, that we deserve to be traumatized or it is our responsibility to forgive or somehow move on as if nothing happened. But I think there's a very dark and dangerous comfort that can be taken in these fantasies. And I think an important thing to remember is that a lot of the time, escapism is a tool to survive, but that's to a certain point, right? Because there's escapism as a means of survival, and then there's escapism as a way of self-abandoning. And the reality is, when we abandon ourselves, when we abandon our being, we do not in fact leave an empty vessel behind. And so what happens with this unmanned vessel, as it were, this person that is unmoored and undirected by themselves, that is out of touch with their own creativity, with their own personal responsibility, with their own goals, their own sense that they can self-actualize, that they can become, is that other things will come in to take the wheel of that car. Those things can look like trauma bonds and codependency. Those things can look like all of the isms of the world, stories we've been told through white supremacy, patriarchy, classism, etc. But we already have a myriad of scripts running in our operating system that are waiting for the moment that we take our hands off the wheel and offer the driver's seat up. And when all of our energy is going in the direction of this limerent fantasy world, right? This place of very deeply held and long tended fantasy, we're also abandoning our reality in a way that doesn't allow us to show up for others, that doesn't allow us to show up for our kids, for our community, for the things that we care about. Something I say all the time is that one of the most important things to remember, right, is the same person that walked you into any situation, the worst one of your life, also carried you out. And sometimes it is a little bit out of the frying pan into the fire. But I think we can all sit and remember a moment that we felt fear and stress and maybe humiliation or shame, but also a very dignified form of presence in our movements, in our sense of direction, in our sense of self. I understand so deeply that feeling of waiting for someone to come, waiting for something to come and fix it, waiting for the love or the job or the moment where everything will click into place and you'll have everything that you knew that you already deserved, that frankly you should have had in the first place, that we all should have had in the first place. And I think we all know on some level, either through our own avoidance of it or through our ability to embrace it, that in the same way that nobody's coming for us, it's because someone's already there and has been the whole time. And for the sake of our relationships, for the sake of not objectifying and pedestaling other people, for proving ourselves right in the way that we are disappointed and let down by the humanness of others, for putting ourselves in increasingly dire and desperate situations out of touch with our own sense of autonomy, control, and creativity, for the sake of not doing that anymore, I think it's worth it to leave the warm comfort of that fantasy in favor of something braver and newer. When I think about the art that has been lost, when I think about the music, the writing, the ways of being, the things that could exist in the world that don't because of the way that women and particularly marginalized people have suffered and suffered expectantly only to never have that savior come, it gives me a sense of grief that I don't have language to put around. It's the kind of grief you feel for something that you can never even find the shape of. You can never even touch the scale of in terms of what it really means and how much is really missing. I love what Vanessa says in this video, that our creativity is a birthright, is a human right. It is something imbued in us ancestrally by the very nature of our living, breathing, and being. And I think the best way to honor that is to show up for it and for us in all of the different iterations and moments that ask us to not dip out and leave ourselves and our bodies prone and tragic in favor of a fantasy that can't come true. To marvel at our capacity for pain and our capacity for growth and our ability to change our mind and find new choices, directions, ways, and paths to be authentic and present. And to honor the many, many people who had to do that to get us here.